Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're listening from. My name is Eric, and this is the Five Head Podcast. Welcome to the 16th episode of the Five Head Podcast. It's been a while since I put out the last episode. Just kind of had some changes in my life that made it harder to get an episode out. But now, hopefully, I am back and can continue the podcast. Anyway, a lot has happened since about a month or so ago when I put out the last episode. So we're going to get into all the haps, but also there's been some kind of thought experiments that I've been doing on TikTok, and I kind of want to get into that too. So before we get started though, you know the routine. If it's your first time listening, you can go back and check me out on YouTube and Spotify and everywhere you get your podcasts. Episodes 1 through 15 are all there. Also, if you're listening, please give that like, share, subscribe button. Really helps a brother out. All right, so to get started, we're going to talk about the elephant in the room. Donald Trump has captured the president of Venezuela and brought him to the U.S. to face justice for an indictment that he has here in the U.S. And of course, people on the right who support Donald Trump are celebrating this as it's one of the greatest things he could ever do. And of course, the people on the left who hate Donald Trump are claiming that this is the worst thing he could ever do and completely illegal, etc. So we're going to talk a little bit about this because kind of both sides have good points in debating whether or not we should be orchestrating regime change and when we do it and who we decide to do that for. Now, as this happened at 3 o'clock in the morning or whenever it was, the very next day, Venezuelans took to the streets celebrating, claiming that for the last 25 years, this guy has ruined their lives and they're happy he's gone. Plus, as a lot of us are becoming experts on Venezuela all of a sudden, and you start researching why we're doing this, the oil market is a huge reason why. The money and the quality of life that Venezuela could provide for its people through the sale of this oil has just been blocked for the last 50 years, essentially. But where U.S. interests align is back in the 70s, U.S. companies went to Venezuela to help drill and refine this oil because the Venezuelan people didn't have the education and technical ability to do it. So the U.S. came in, U.S. companies like Exxon and Chevron, and started drilling and refining this oil, which helped out the Venezuelan economy. But then Chavez and then afterwards Maduro seized those American companies, or at least the production of those American companies, and essentially made themselves rich. So Venezuela has never reached the full potential that it could be with the money that it could bring in from selling this oil. He's also been using this oil to help fund Russia through the Ukraine aggression, which is why both Democrats and Republicans for the last 10 years now have been screaming Maduro needs to go. So back in Trump's first administration, countless Senate and House Democrats are literally on video complaining that Trump is not ending the Maduro regime. They were literally saying he needs to force a regime change. And now that he's forcing that regime change that they wanted, they're saying this is illegal and it's not our job to force a regime change. This whole idea about bombing countries without approval from Congress, that's not even an argument. Constitutionally, it's up to Congress to declare the United States in a war with another country. The president, however, has the authority to conduct military operations on foreign soil without going through Congress. And that includes boots on the ground in bombing places, etc. As a matter of fact, 45 of 47 presidents have all authorized military operations in foreign countries, including boots on the ground and bombings. The president does not have the legal authority to declare the United States in an official war. Only Congress can do that. But the president can conduct military operations as he or she sees fit as the commander-in-chief. But that's kind of just a moot argument anyway. People who love Trump will highlight the fact that nothing he did there was illegal, and people who hate him will say it's illegal because no matter what he does, they use the word illegal associated with it. And that's fine. That's just politics. However, the legitimate debate here is whether or not the U.S. as a whole should be changing regimes for another country. And everyone flip-flops on this. Because if you think back to the 1940s, should the U.S. have gone in and ended the Hitler regime? Well, the people today who are saying the U.S. has no business ending regimes in other countries, that's up for their country to decide, would 100% agree that the U.S. should have gone in and ended the Hitler regime. So really, the answer to whether or not the U.S. should be ending regimes in other countries is it depends. It depends on what's going on, how bad it is, and whether or not the people are capable of ending that regime themselves. Personally, I think it's good that Maduro's out. I think this is a positive for Venezuela, and I think it's a positive in relation to U.S. interests in the region. At the same time, that doesn't delegitimize opposition to the action that Trump took in Venezuela. The best argument against what Trump did was from some random person on TikTok. She said, if another country were to come in and capture President Trump, there would be millions of people here in the U.S. that would take to the streets and celebrate that. Just like millions of people took to the streets in Venezuela to celebrate the removal of Maduro. But just because millions of people would celebrate the removal of Donald Trump doesn't make it right, doesn't make it okay for a foreign government to come in and capture the sitting U.S. president. And that was the best argument I heard against removing Maduro from Venezuela. But one thing that could come from this, that could benefit all of us, and this kind of goes into one of the thought experiments that I was doing on TikTok. There's roughly $17 trillion worth of oil in Venezuela. Now think about that for a second. Our government in revenue collects about $5 trillion a year from taxpayers, and then it spends about $7 trillion a year. Whatever deal the U.S. works out with new Venezuelan leadership, or if the U.S. just kind of takes over Venezuela, hypothetically speaking, that $17 trillion worth of value could completely end the need for income taxes here in the U.S. Now, the U.S. is 330 million people, and they generate about $5 trillion in tax revenue, as I said, right? Venezuela is only about 28 million people. So with $17 trillion in value with this oil, we can make sure $7 trillion goes to the people of Venezuela to help build a free market, a free economy, a free people. And then there'd still be $10 trillion of value for the U.S. in order to completely end income taxes. Now, of course, that doesn't mean we take all their oil and sell it, but the oil becomes a commodity, an asset, of which other countries invest in, to the tune, collectively, of $17 trillion. Now, that's just hypothetical. I don't think the U.S. is going to take over, like Venezuela is not going to become the 51st state. Oh, you want to hear something crazy? Another hypothetical? If it did become the 51st state, it would net Republicans 20 to 30 seats in the House and 2 Senate seats. Because the people of Venezuela are overwhelmingly conservative, thanks to the last 50 years being under a socialist dictator. So whether they truly are conservative or not, in the interim, they would vote conservative because it's opposite of the oppression that they've had for the last 50 years. Anyway, though, borrowing off that value could completely eliminate income taxes here in the U.S. So now I'm going to use that as a segue to get into my idea for income taxes here in the U.S. I am completely behind this idea of eliminating income taxes and replacing them with a national consumption tax. And I can hear the initial argument from anyone is a national sales tax is a regressive tax. It would be a regressive tax if it was a flat sales tax. So if you made sales tax 10% across the board, that could be a regressive tax. And I've actually written this up. I just don't know how to get it online for everyone to view. But I am going to send it to a few senators and House reps and see what happens with it. But what I'm suggesting is a progressive sales tax, just like we have a progressive income tax. So right now, the more money you make, the higher you pay in taxes. That would be the same thing with a national sales tax. Everything would be tiered based on the category of what's being sold and the amount or the price of the item that's being sold. So let me just give a 30,000 view explanation of this. Things like groceries would have a 0% sales tax. The categories would be very detailed down to individual product markets. So like t-shirts, if you buy a t-shirt that's priced at less than $50, then you only pay a 5% sales tax. However, if you're rich and you buy the same exact size and color t-shirt, but it happens to have a Louis Vuitton tag on it, and that shirt costs $300, there's a 30% sales tax on that. You do the same thing with cars. If you buy a car for less than $50,000, it has a 0% sales tax on it. If you buy a car between $50,000 and $75,000, it has a 5% sales tax on it. If you buy a car between $75,000 and $100,000, it's got a 15% sales tax on it. And for everyone who can afford to buy a car that costs more than $100,000, there is a 30% sales tax on that. and it's a progressive tax. So if you buy a $75,000 car, you're not paying a 10% sales tax on $75,000. You're paying a 10% sales tax on $25,000 because the first $50,000 has a 0% sales tax applied to it. And it's the same thing with housing. What we do through HUD is identify in the area that you live the median household price. And then if you buy a house within 200% of that median price, it's a 0% sales tax for buying the house. So if the average house cost in the area you live is $400,000, you won't pay a sales tax for buying a $700,000 house because it's 0% tax up to $800,000 since the median price in your area of a house is $400,000. So that would mean everyday people like you and me who are buying a new home wouldn't be paying sales tax on it. However, if a rich person comes in and buys a $34 mansion in your area, they'll pay 30% sales tax just on the purchase of that home. So it would be a progressive sales tax, just like we have progressive income taxes. So instead of taxing everyone's labor, tax their lifestyle. It also means no one can get out of paying taxes. If you want to tax the rich, a national sales tax does that. Because right now the rich live off the buy, borrow, die strategy. They buy stocks, they borrow off those stocks' value, and they never repay what they borrowed until they die. And the money that they borrow is not considered income. It's a loan, therefore it's tax-free. However, when they borrow $100 million for cash, they're spending that cash. So now with a national sales tax, they can borrow $100 million without a tax, because as they use that $100 million to pay for things, it'll all be taxed. And the rich don't hoard money, they hoard wealth. They spend their cash on the same things that you and I spend our cash on. They buy clothing, shoes, food, cars, houses, home goods, vacations, yachts, electronics, cell phones. They spend on the same things we spend, they just spend a lot more for each individual thing. So with a national sales tax, they would pay a lot more in percentage and they wouldn't be able to evade taxes at all. But not only would the rich not be able to evade paying taxes, the rest of us would effectively pay a lower tax rate than we are now. You see, one of the complaints that people have about the unfair tax system is that business owners and corporations and the rich people who run them get to write off the expense of like rent on an office building before taxes apply to any income they have left over, whereas we have taxes taken out of our paycheck and then after that we have to pay rent and utilities and all the other costs that businesses get to write off. A national sales tax instead of an income tax would essentially allow us to write off our rent and utilities and bills prior to having taxable income, because the tax is applied at the point of sale, which means after your bills are paid, which are all not sales taxed, whatever spending money you have left over is all that can be taxed. So let's put some numbers on this really quick. If you make $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year before taxes, and after federal income taxes, you actually only make like $4,300 a month. That's how much you net. And then after that, your rent, your car payment, your utilities, your bills are about $2,500 a month. That leaves you with about $1,800 of spending power each month. So you were taxed on $4,000 a month. But if you were taxed on just your spending and not your income, then you would actually get the full $4,800 a month instead of $4,300 a month, minus your $2,500 in bills would leave you with $2,300 a month to spend instead of $1,800. So it would leave you with $500 more to spend. And once you spend all $2,300 of that, effectively, you'll be paying less than 10% in taxes on that spending, but we'll call it 10% for number's sake. That's $230. That's more than half off of what you're currently paying in taxes on $4,000 a month. So it's a tax cut and all of your bills are essentially written off before taxes are applied. Now, where do I come up with an effective rate of single digits for the lower and middle economic class? Well, again, I have this all written out kind of on a proposal with a bunch of data sets and numbers to back it up. But due to the progressive rates on spending and the things that are essential that wouldn't be taxed, like your utilities, like your bills, like basic groceries, etc., it would effectively lead to less than a 10% tax for the middle and lower economic classes. It would also lead to roughly 20 to 30% tax overall for the rich, because they spend a lot more money on a lot more expensive things than we do. So not only would they pay more in raw dollars like they do now, they would actually pay a higher tax rate than the rest of us, which everyone complains about. Now, overall, on average, you want across the board about a 15% tax, not a 15% sales tax on everything. Again, with progressive tiers, some things would be a 0% tax, some things would be a 5% tax, some things would be a 30% tax. But overall, where we came up with these numbers is you wanted to average out about a 15% sales tax average. Why 15%? Well, we measured current consumer spending versus how much the government gets in from individual income taxes. Individual income taxes alone in 2025 funded the government about $2.4 trillion. There was a little over $20 trillion spent by consumers, and that's after taxes. So if consumers are going to spend $20 trillion again this year, then you want on average for there to be about a 15% sales tax collected in order to make sure that tax revenue that's currently funded by income taxes plus more is funded, because that would lead to about $3 trillion in taxes to the federal government. So that would lead to a little bit more. And actually on this idea, I actually called it a fresh start for America, where in 2026, no income taxes would be taken out of anyone's paycheck at all, and the sales tax wouldn't start until 2027. So the idea would be in 2026, when you file your tax returns for 2025, if you owe money, that's forgiven. And if you're due to get a return, you would still get it. And no taxes will be taken out of your paycheck at all in 2026. Plus, no sales taxes. So you might be wondering, well, then how is the government going to make up for that $2.4 trillion? Well, in my proposal, I also suggested they write off all SBA loans and end the SBA. Just forgive all of it. It's about $400 billion. And forgive all back taxes that are expected to actually be paid. That's another $200 billion. So $2.4 trillion plus $600 billion, about $3 to $3.1 trillion when you forgive all SBA loans and you forgive all back taxes owed across the country and give everyone a fresh start. So how would that $3 trillion be paid for? Well, in 2025, the House and Senate upped the allowance of deficit spending to $4 trillion. So you take the tariff money that's being brought in, whether you like tariffs or not, there's money coming in from that. You take rates going down, which saves interest payments on the debt. And you take $4 trillion of allowed debt increase to give everyone a fresh start in 2026 and then implement a national sales tax for 2027. SBA would be gone. The IRS would be gone. The Department of Treasury would monitor the compliance from businesses to make sure they're applying a sales tax for the federal government on each good, the same way they do a state tax right now. And it would give everyone a fresh start. It would give everyone in the middle to lower economic classes a tax cut, which equates to more spending power and less taxes having to be paid in the end. And it would make sure the rich can't evade taxes. Buy, borrow, die all you want. As soon as you start spending that money, it's going to be taxed either way. Plus, capital gains tax would still be there. So when the rich sell stocks, the capital gains tax is still there. Plus, corporate taxes would still be there. So I am all in on this idea of a national sales tax. At least give it a try. It's not like implementing taxes again would be difficult. Let's give everyone a fresh start. And then let's stop taxing people for their labor. Let's tax them for their lifestyle. People that are able to live lavish lifestyles have to pay more for it. It's that simple. So if you're interested in seeing this full proposal that I put together, email me, eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com, and I'll give you a copy of it. If you know how to get it in front of important people, let me know so we can get it in front of important people. For now, I'm just going to email the offices of our reps and senators with this proposal attached to it until someone at least responds that they got it and they're looking at it. Now, that kind of leads me into another thought experiment that I've been toying with on TikTok, and this revolves around minimum wage. I absolutely hate the minimum wage argument because it's basically a moot argument. Nobody makes minimum wage. No one is living off a minimum wage. Less than 1% of the country makes the federal minimum wage, and 90-something% of those people are teenagers working part-time jobs, college kids working part-time jobs, and people working extra side gigs for extra spending cash. No one is living off of federal minimum wage. Plus, states set their own minimum wages. Plus, companies on top of that set their own minimum wages. Like the McDonald's down the street from me, they make $16 an hour. No one is living on $7.25 an hour. However, people still want to have the debate on minimum wage and whether or not it should be raised. Funny thing about that is the goalposts are moving. So it used to be people would say minimum wage should at least be X amount of dollars, whether it's $15 an hour, $25 an hour, etc. And now it's changed to a livable wage, whatever that equates to. And the reason for that is so the debate can never end. Because as people start to realize, you know what, no one actually makes $7.25 an hour. The average is higher than $20 an hour. So by arguing minimum wage should be $15 an hour, it's an argument that doesn't get anywhere. So you up it to $25 an hour. People are already close to making that on average anyway. And just naturally over time, as cost of living goes up, wages are going to go up past $25 an hour. But people are still going to be struggling to make ends meet. So then you got to change the $25 an hour to 30 or 35 or 50 or whatever the case. So in order to not have to continuously change that, the whole thing is shifted now to livable wage. Nobody, regardless of the job, should be working for less than livable wage. So what is a livable wage? Obviously, a livable wage has many factors to it. The cost of living of where you live, what your living situation is. Do you rent, own? Do you live with someone else who's also paying rent or part of the mortgage? There's so many factors that determine what a livable wage is that it's almost impossible to come up with a livable wage policy across the board. But by using the phrase livable wage, you can keep this debate going endlessly. As time goes on, cost of living will go up. The amount people make on average will go up. But you can always make the argument it's not a livable wage. We need a livable wage for everyone. So now I've started asking people, why don't we make minimum wage $250 an hour? That meets the threshold of a livable wage, right? Anyone in the country, no matter where they live, can live off of $250 an hour. So why shouldn't minimum wage be $250 an hour? Now, the debate on this comes with two general arguments. One side saying we need a livable wage, and the other side arguing if you raise it by too much, companies will not be able to afford it. They're going to have to raise prices significantly in order to cover the pay for that hourly wage. And if the prices get too high, people will just stop buying that product or service, and it's going to put companies out of business. And now these employees won't have any wage. So that's always the argument against raising minimum wage. And then the other side's argument has always been, please, $15 an hour is not going to put a company out of business. They can afford $15 an hour when they're boasting all of these profits. So why not $250 an hour? And my point in asking that is the argument that it becomes too much to give as a wage at the bare minimum because it'll put companies out of business and drive prices through the roof. That argument is one that everyone agrees with. It's just, where do you draw the line at a dollar amount per hour that meets that argument? So if you're someone that's like, please, businesses can afford to raise minimum wage, then I'm asking you, why not $250 an hour? At what dollar amount per hour would you then have to accept the other side's argument that that's too expensive for businesses? Or what is the dollar amount where you could still argue this wouldn't drive prices up and drive companies out of business? And I'm trying to have these discussions on TikTok, but everyone is so passionate about their stance. They don't want to debate anything that has like logic or discussion behind it, where we can rationally draw a line somewhere. They don't want to. Instead, the argument just shifts to whatever, companies just need to pay a livable wage. But if you can't put a dollar figure on that, it's never going to get fixed. And I think that is all done intentionally. It's the same thing with climate change. But then when they use the phrase global warming and the earth getting hotter and ice caps melting, when they start saying all these things and they start putting dates on it, and those dates have come and went and those things haven't happened, it discredits what they're saying. So in order to make it so you can't discredit the fear mongering on the climate, they've shifted from global warming to climate change, just general climate change. And that way it becomes never ending. No matter what the temperatures on Earth do over the next 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, they can still claim that there's a threat of climate change. And that's what they're doing now with the minimum wage argument. $15 an hour is nothing. You start getting over $25 an hour, it becomes a legit argument from the opposing side that this could drive companies out of business. So instead of ruining your own argument by putting a legit dollar amount to it, we just make it generic. Companies need to pay a livable wage. So as long as anyone is struggling to pay their bills, people will be able to complain. That's because companies aren't paying a livable wage. So that's why I'm trying this experiment on TikTok and asking people, what about a $250 an hour minimum wage? Who would say no to that? I mean, I get it. Envious hate against billionaires. It sucks when people are that rich. But what could you possibly argue is a fair, livable wage across the board? And speaking of billionaires, so I've had this discussion on TikTok too. There's a lot of young people who are buying into the idea of democratic socialism. And at first I was like, you don't want socialism. You don't want a government system where your day-to-day decisions are controlled by that government. But they've kind of moved the goalpost on that as well. They don't want socialism as a form of government that controls your day-to-day life. What they want is democratic socialism as a replacement to capitalism. So workers own the means of production, the companies they work for provide all the safety social nets that they need, and they get to share the wealth of the company, which all sounds great. But in practice, that's not what they actually want with democratic socialism. Case in point, Elon Musk. People who want democratic socialism hate Elon Musk because he's worth, $600 billion right now? The only goal they have in democratic socialism is to bring Elon Musk down. It's envious hatred. They just want to see his wealth confiscated so they can laugh at him that his wealth was confiscated. If people out there who claim to want democratic socialism truly wanted democratic socialism in the way they define it, then they should be celebrating Elon Musk. Elon Musk runs his companies in the exact way that democratic socialism wants companies ran. Take Tesla, for example. Elon Musk does not take a salary from Tesla, which means every penny that's earned from the sales of Teslas goes back to the people of the company. Elon Musk's companies, like Tesla, provide the social safety nets for their employees so that the rest of us, through our tax dollars, don't have to provide for them. Employees of Tesla, first of all, make on average 6-figure salaries. Livable wage, right? They get social safety nets in the form of their benefits. They have great medical plans. Some of them are even $0 premium payments a month for the employees. They have disability benefits that cover short and long-term disability. They have life insurance benefits. They get unlimited time off. And yes, that's a real thing. The company that I'm subbed to on this IT contract that I'm on, they get unlimited time off too. What does unlimited time off means? It means exactly what it says. You could take off as much time as you want, fully paid throughout the entire year. There's no limit to it. If you have a doctor's appointment today, instead of leaving work 2 hours early and then making that time up later or having to take 2 hours of PTO, you can just take the whole day off to mentally get ready for your doctor's appointment, and you get paid for that whole day. And you can still go on your vacation next week that you had scheduled. And Tesla employees get this unlimited time off. So they own the means of production. So Elon does not earn a penny off of the employees' labor. All that money goes back to the employees. They have all of these social safety nets covered by the company. Plus, they get shared wealth in the company. For being a Tesla employee, they get free stock every year in the company. That's shared wealth. And if they want more stock than what they're given for free, they get to purchase that at a 15% discount. So if the stock is worth $400, an employee buys a share, it only costs them $340. That's 60 free instant dollars of profit share just for buying a stock. Plus, the pay package that Elon is set to get, that's upwards of $1 trillion if they reach certain milestones over the next 8 to 10 years. That's all shared with the employees of the company. That pay package is in stock options, not cash. And those stock options are shared with everyone who works for the company. Plus, once those pay packages go through and those stock options are bought, dividends are paid to everyone who owns stock in Tesla, which means dividends are paid to everyone in the company. On top of that, if there's an issue with the company or some sort of lawsuit, that's handled by Elon and not by the employees of Tesla, which means the employees of Tesla share all the reward of their labor through the company and none of the risk. It is exactly what you want from democratic socialism. So if you really believe in democratic socialism as a replacement to like capitalism, then you should be screaming for every single company to value their employees the way Elon values his. I guess I just never understood the hatred for billionaires. Like, instead of trying to bring them down, why not change the system to bring the rest of us up? Anyway, let's get into some of the haps that have been going on since I last put out an episode. The Epstein files were fully released. and it's caused the shitstorm we all thought it would cause. And it's just doing everything that I said it was going to do in previous episodes, which is reaffirm people's belief that the politician that they hate the most sexually assaulted women and children through Epstein. And for the people who believe the politician they like the most never sexually assaulted women and children through Epstein, the release of these files has done nothing but reaffirm that, because it's all been a big nothing burger and no concrete evidence. And everything else that's happened since then, everyone is saying is just a distraction from the Epstein files. Very well could be a distraction from the Epstein files, but the fact of the matter is, life goes on. Things happen every single day in life, whether Epstein files are being released or redacted or partially released or fully released. So not everything is a distraction. It's just life. Just things happen on top of there being Epstein files out there. On top of Pam Bondi not releasing the full amount of Epstein files like they were required to do by law. And everything I've been talking about in my podcast so far, it's all circling back, right? So a law was passed that all the files have to be released, but not all the files were released. Now what? Congress can't have Pam Bondi arrested. She controls the DOJ, essentially. So what happens when one branch of government ignores another branch of government? We talked about this in an episode all in itself. But look, the bottom line on these Epstein files is the victims are just going to have to name names. And even then, naming names will be he said, she said, until it gets to a court of law. But no one is going to be arrested until names are named directly. A lot of the victims have been able to come out now in the last couple years, get in front of cameras, admit that they were a victim. You know, that's a hard thing to do when you've been through some of the stuff that they've been through. But if they're willing to publicly out themselves as an Epstein victim, why aren't they willing to just officially file criminal charges against the individuals who sexually assaulted them? Not like I saw this prince from this country at Epstein's house talking with another victim. No. When you were at Epstein's and you were asked to give a massage, who was it that told you to give them a massage? Probably Epstein. And who was the man that while you were massaging made you grab his genitals, even though you didn't want to? Who is the man or woman that sexually assaulted you? File direct criminal charges against that person. That does two things. One, it ends speculation from all this partially released information, redacted files, some of the files, all the files, etc. And it actually starts the process for these women getting justice. Because until criminal charges are filed, they can't get justice. There's not going to be a criminal hearing out of thin air. Charges have to be filed. Those charges have to be investigated. Indictments have to be made. And arrests have to be made to set court dates for the actual criminal trials. I know a lot of these victims signed NDAs like years ago, and they were young and they were pushed into signing the NDAs. So what? I'm sure at this point we could start a GoFundMe to make sure that if they violate their NDA and they have to pay a fine, those fines are covered. And when a crime is committed, I'm pretty sure the Department of Justice can make sure that they are not legally liable for breaking their NDA. And this would end the whole thing. The files wouldn't even matter at that point. The victims should come out, name names, file criminal charges, and let's get people who assaulted them behind bars. But with the way it's going, it's just more nothing burger. Some of the files were released, most of it redacted. People are upset about that. So slowly but surely, things will be unredacted. Slowly but surely, the rest of the files will trickle out. And at the end of the day, nothing's going to happen. Will Trump be impeached for Epstein? Trump is going to be impeached if Democrats win the House in 2026 anyway. Because just like his first term, they vowed to impeach him for something. It doesn't matter what he does or does not do. They're going to House impeach him when they control the House. That's inevitable. He's not going to be removed from office, especially since I still think the GOP will keep the Senate. But even if they don't, he's not going to be removed from office because by the time it gets through all that process, he's only going to have a year left or so anyway. So if that's the goal of all this, that does nothing. If the goal is actual justice, they can end speculation right now and the victims file direct charges against the people who assaulted them. We can end the Epstein files now since the victims have already outed themselves and are able to identify themselves. Let's let them identify who their assaulters were. Another thing that's happened lately is this whole daycare fraud in Minneapolis. But the thing about this whole thing is that it has nothing even to do with Somalians, in my opinion. Doesn't matter if Somalians, Americans, Russians, it really doesn't matter. The point that's being highlighted here is that how easy it is for people to get a hold of government funds. Funding special programs just opens the door for this type of stuff. People who create organizations or businesses specifically to fit the criteria of what a special fund goes to so they can get access to those funds. And what's funny is everyone claims fraud, waste, and abuse, but the fraud is not on the governor. The fraud is not on the state legislature for funding these programs. The onus of fraud is on the people who are receiving this funding. Are they receiving the funding to pay for the things that the funding is supposed to pay for, to go towards the community help things that the funding is supposed to help the community with? And it's extremely easy to enrich yourself using special program funds like this. It's a very easy thing to do. So the problem on the state legislature side or the governor's side or on the federal dollar side is allotting money to these programs anyway. If it's a function that the state wants to provide for people in need, the state should provide it itself through state employees. Otherwise, you're just making money available to anyone that's willing to work the system. The fact that they're Somalian and these particular daycare centers in this video anyway, that's just the tip of the iceberg of the overall issue of these special programs. And of course, state legislatures and governors and the federal government want to keep funding these special programs because it comes back to them in campaign contributions. And it's very easy to do this. You or I can do this today. Here's an example. Let's say your state allots a certain amount of money for special programs. Maybe those programs are listed out, and in some state budgets, it's a general fund. So as people come up with ideas to help the community throughout the year, they can get access to that funding for that without it having to go through more approvals and voting in the next budget iteration of the next year. So let's say you have a friend in the state legislature, just got there, and you want to make this mutual agreement work. But even if you don't have a friend in the state legislature, you can make a friend in the state legislature. Show up to their town halls, contact their office, get to know them. Once you get a response, once you start this connection, you can pitch your idea. So here's an idea. You start a lawn service company whose sole purpose is to mow the lawns for free of the elderly, the disabled, the disenfranchised, the poor. It'll help keep their lawns nice, keep the value up in the neighborhood. Everyone will appreciate it. And it really does help people who are unable to cut their grass themselves, right? So you start making a relationship with someone in your state legislature. Finally, you get a bug in your ear once you built this relationship that, hey, you want to start helping disenfranchised people, poor people, elderly, disabled people by mowing your lawns for free. And you want a special program created that allows the state to grant you funds so that you could spend your days mowing lawns for people for free. And of course, in turn, members of the state legislature that sign off on approving this funding that you can get access to, you will make sure you donate to their PACs and super PACs come campaign time. So a lot of states already have budgets set aside for special programs. And so once you pitch this idea and they like that, they create an application for you to get access to special program money that fits your idea. So that way, when you apply to it, you can get approved for it. Now, let's just say the state approves $1 million to this program. We're going to test it out. Out of a $700 million or $1 billion state budget or whatever, $1 million is not an issue. So you start applying for the funds. I need $50,000 for yard equipment. I need another $50,000 for a truck to tow the yard equipment, because this is what I'm going to do now with my time. And I need $100,000 to pay myself. And with that, I'll be able to do X amount of lawns over the next 3 or 4 months or whatever the case, right? So you get access to that funding and you mow lawns. It might actually equate to basically making $1,000 a lawn. But at the end of the day, the program is funded to have lawns mowed for people who can't mow it themselves. You're providing that service. It's kind of a win-win. You're also campaigning for them. When you show up at their house and say, hey, I'm mowing the lawn for free. This state rep sponsored it, and this is what we're doing. That's good campaigning for those candidates. But you also want to make sure you get your hands on as much of that $1 million that's been approved for this kind of program as you can. So what do? You don't want a bunch of lawn service companies finding out about this, because then they're going to use up the $1 million. You don't want to hire a bunch of people, because then you got to pay a bunch of people so you make less money. So then you talk to your buddy and say, hey, you know there's grants out there for mowing people's lawns? And then your buddy's like, yeah, I don't mind mowing some lawns. I don't know how to start a business and apply for the grants and then make sure I'm tracking the money's going to that and then maintaining equipment and writing off depreciation. So you say, don't worry, I already do this for my company. You start a lawn service company. You'll be a subsidiary of me. I'll do the grant applications for you. I'll make sure to list the equipment you need. I know exactly what you need to do it. All you have to do is go mow a few lawns a week, and I will take care of the rest. So then you get them to start a company or an organization, a nonprofit, whatever the case, and you get them access to that grant money, of course, with a consulting fee for you for handling the business side for them of like 20% of whatever grant money they get. So it's a win-win. So they start earning $1,000 a lawn just to cut grass all day. Well, now you're earning a percentage of the grant money that they are receiving to do this. So by the end of the year, you and your buddy have used up that $1 million. And it's not fraud on the state legislature side because they heard this really great program to get lawns mowed for free to help out people who really need it. So that's a good program. They approved allotting money to it because it was such a low amount. And you did nothing wrong because you are filling out the paperwork exactly as the law requires you to fill out to get access to that money. You are actually mowing some lawns. So some people are like, oh, great, I didn't have to mow my lawn today. And you've made hundreds of thousands of dollars doing it over the course of a year. That is the kind of work that these programs breed. It's not necessarily wrong. It's just overly paid basic work that helps the community, but makes the person who's doing that work rich. Anyways, that's the episode for this week. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, debates, let me know in the comments and I'll try to address it in the next episode. Or you could email me at eric.middleviewmedia@gmail.com. Thank you guys for listening. 5 Head out.